Hi there, welcome to UCLA Connections, our web series on topics that we know you care about and that we're bringing our UCLA experts online to answer. My name is Jessica Wolf. I work for UCLA Strategic Communications, and today we're going to be talking about how marital or partner relationships can withstand the pressures of COVID-19. It's a big one. Before we get started, I want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded, but only the guest speaker and myself are being recorded. Your chat functions, your Q&A functions are all disabled, and your video and audio are muted. So feel free to get comfy, do a couple of jumping jacks, pet your dog, turn up the volume, walk over the kitchen sink where you'll invariably find a dish left there by your significant other, at least you will if your life is anything like mine right now. So after this is over, we'll be hosting a recorded version of this on our website, ucla.edu/connections. And I'd like to welcome today Benjamin Karney, who is a professor of psychology and social psychology at UCLA. He is an expert on intimate relationships and changes in stability and communication within intimate relationships. He's the co-director of the UCLA Marriage Lab, where his research focus is dedicated to looking at the ways marriage and intimate relationships work and the external stressors that can have an impact on them. So please welcome Benjamin Karney. Sorry, Ben.
Thank you, Jessica. Pleasure to be here. I have nowhere else to be.
Yeah, it's really good to talk to you. It's a subject near and dear to my heart because I just got married 6 months ago, literally almost to the day.
Congratulations. I have just a couple of questionnaires for you.
Please send them over. I'm thrilled. It's great in a lot of ways. We have been together for a very long time and lived together for a long time, so not a lot of surprises, but definitely some new challenges. And for us, I'm very proud of the way we've responded. We've just kind of expanded our grace and compassion for one another, but I can imagine that's not necessarily always the case. So a lot of the questions we got were about the difference between humans in a relationship and how do successful couples who are very different from one another generally navigate stressful situations and keep their relationship strong?
Sure. Some people would say that's what relationships are all about. Like that, what's fundamental to an intimate relationship is negotiating difference. Like that's what you have to do, because if two people are not identical and they are close to each other, that's when you step on each other's toes. Right? I don't worry about someone who's far away. You and I have very little disagreement about because we don't know each other well. But the closer someone gets, the more inevitable it is that we're going to confront the things we disagree on.
Right.
So a lot of the work of relationships is negotiating those differences. And that's true in pandemics, and it's true out of pandemics. It's always true. So what makes that hard? Because it is something that couples complain about. It's one of the biggest complaints that couples have about each other is, we don't negotiate difference well, or we don't disagree well, or, what does it mean to disagree well? And this is something there's a lot of research on this. This is one of the first ways that people started studying relationships systematically. And nowadays, I think the smartest people talking about this have this to say. What gets in the way of a successful negotiation is the misunderstanding of the difference between a vertical conflict and a horizontal conflict.
Okay, what's a vertical conflict?
A vertical conflict has a right answer.
Okay.
There's a right answer that's on top, and there's a bad answer that's on the bottom. So if you and I disagree about what the capital of Portugal is,
one of us is right.
Probably.
Sure. Okay.
I don't actually know what the capital of Portugal is, but there's a right answer. We could find it. And but a lot of disagreements in relationships are horizontal conflicts. They're differences of preference or opinion, but there's no right answer. So if we want to go to dinner and you want to go to Chinese food and I want to go to Italian food, I wouldn't say, no, it's wrong to want Chinese food. That's bad food. Only Italian food is good. No one would say that.
Yeah, you wouldn't be married long if that.
You wouldn't be very long if you did say that. So what happens when couples struggle is that they confuse a horizontal difference for a vertical one.
Mm.
So, let's say the difference is, I want our kids to go to private school, you want our kids to go to public school. Well, I might say, no, you're wrong. Public school is bad. You shouldn't go to a public school. And you might say, no, you're wrong. Private school is bad. And now we're debating each other. That's not going to work.
No.
We're not going to convince each other. Nobody's ever convinced each other of anything ever. But the problem is, if I believe that I'm right and you are wrong, and my way of getting what I want is to convince you that you're wrong, well, I'm down a dead end street.
Because that just doesn't work.
It doesn't work, and it's not even accurate. What's true is you want something, and you have every right to want it. And I want something else, and I also have every right to want it. So now we've got what we really have, and what's a more constructive starting point is, let's explore what are the different values that we both have, the different preferences that we both have here. Now we're in a negotiation instead of a debate, and a negotiation is always better than a debate.
I like that. That's a good nugget.
So imagine now we're in the middle of this global pandemic, and the things we disagree about feel a lot like life or death.
Yeah.
So what if the disagreement is, I think we should not see anyone, including our parents. You think, well, we shouldn't see most people, but our parents it's okay because they're okay. That's an acceptable risk. Now you can see where people might get into conflict.
Yeah.
Especially if they think that it's a vertical conflict. Like, no, I'm right about the risk. And you're wrong about the risk. You're being too conservative. You're too scared. Or you're being too liberal. You're not being careful enough. So you can see there's a fine line between, I'm going to convince you that I'm right.
Right.
Versus, and the problem is that a lot of couples now are trying to convince each other.
Oh.
About there's the right way to do the dishes. You should, the minute you dirty a dish, you should clean it, of course, that second. Versus, well, it's okay to leave it for a while and I'll clean it later.
Yeah.
That's not a vertical conflict.
No.
It's a horizontal one. But if I'm trying to convince you this is the way it's done, it's going to be worse than it needs to be.
So how do we navigate that? I'm actually in that situation because my husband is a physical trainer and he works with a lot of rehabilitative patients. So he has a couple of patients that he still sees. And in order to protect them, we don't see anyone. And some of our friends are starting to get together, and I'm not going to go because I don't want to, by extension, cause trauma to that extended people. But it's not the most fun solution, and it's probably not what I would have chosen if it weren't for his line of work, It
does, but it sounds to me like you started off with a disagreement, which is, again, disagreement inevitable. So that's not a critique. It's not a bad thing. We're all going to have disagreements with our closest partners. And then, so what's the best way what do you do? Well, clearly it's not going to work if I try to get my way, I want my way, you want your way. That's reasonable. We both want our way. And if we start by trying to convince each other, that's not going to work. So what can we do? Well, one thing we can start by doing is leaning into the difference and saying, okay, well, tell me about your position. Tell me about why you feel the way you feel. That's a hard thing to do. That's a hard thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because it feels a lot like giving up my own position.
Right.
It feels like if I allow your position to be valid, how can my different position also be valid?
Because
it can, because it is. The answer is because it is, because we're both entitled to our position. But it's tough. It's tough. In our culture, it's especially tough.
We also found that we actually are both feeling a lot of the same ways, disappointed, wishing it was different. So there's a much more overlap than not, really. Which
you can discover if you are curious about each other's different positions. So, step one is staying curious within a disagreement.
Mhm.
Tough. Because I want my way really badly. So, but if I can somehow find my care for my partner and say, okay, we disagree. You have a different position. Let's find out about your position. And I'm going to trust that we'll get around to my position too, that you'll also be curious about my position. But let's start with your position. So tell me, why do you want to go to this thing that I don't think we should go to? Oh, the curiosity allows you to find the common things that you just talked about. Oh, yeah. We are both worried. Oh, yeah. We're both frustrated. We're both scared. We're both lonely. We both miss our people. Well, now look at all this common stuff that we've discovered here.
Yeah.
So we're only disagreeing about what the level of risk is. You're a 5 and I'm a 6. Oh, that doesn't feel so bad anymore.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean the disappointment isn't going to spike again, but you can kind of
modulate it, manage it.
Yeah. It sounds like one of the questions we got was, how do we keep from fighting? And it sounds to me like there's conflict is natural, right? Or conflicting positions are natural.
Yes.
Obviously physical fighting isn't desirable, but should we be trying not to fight, like in the sense that we're not disagreeing with one another?
Well, I think we should distinguish between a disagreement and a fight.
True.
Fighting, nobody wants to fight. Disagreeing, whether you want or not, it's going to happen. So what we're saying is disagreement is inevitable, absolutely inevitable. So the question is, can we stop a disagreement from being a fight? Can we not have to fight every time we disagree? And you can imagine in the example of like, if you wanted Chinese food and I wanted Italian food, what would we do about it? We might take turns. We might say, is there a third way? Maybe we'll go and just, we'll have Indian food. Thai food. Yeah, exactly. We'll cook at home, whatever. Like you can see, is there a compromise? Can we either trade off? Can we find a third way? Maybe if I say, you know what, tonight I will go with your dinner, even though I don't really like it that much, because I know that in the future, maybe we'll do it my way, a different way. So those are all ways of disagreeing without fighting. Not easy to do. And here's the problem. This is what, in my lab, what we've studied is how does stress, so everything we've talked about so far are parts of intimacy everywhere you find intimacy. The question that we've asked is, what does stress do to these processes?
Right.
I bet you can guess what stress does to these processes.
Makes them a whole lot harder, right?
It makes it a lot harder. All these sort of mental things that I've got to do, like, oh wait, I want something, I'm going to set it aside a little bit to listen to what you want. That's a piece of work to do.
Yeah, when you're under chronic stress.
It's a piece of work to do even if you're not.
Yeah.
But it's hard, and when you're under chronic stress, it's hard. It is hard.
I know one of the things that you're studying a lot is the effects of financial strain and trauma on relationships. And I feel like we got some questions about that. And clearly a lot of families and relationships are coping with this right now and will be for some time.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on how, some proactive ways to navigate that particular stressor? How prevalent is that?
Well, there's some really interesting work showing that one of the big problems with stress is that it can be invisible. Mm. Again, setting the pandemic aside for a second, at the end of a long day, when I come home, I know how hard my day has been. I have all the memories of my hard day in my head, and I know why I need extra care tonight. But when I see you at the end of that same long day, your long day is invisible to me.
True.
I don't know what day you've had. So if it happens that maybe you don't feel like taking care of me tonight because you've also had a long day and you would like to be taken care of, all I can see is, what? Why is my request so hard for you to fulfill? Why aren't you doing what I asked you to do? Where's the love? Because I don't see your stress and you don't see mine.
Right.
It turns out that when couples know about their stress, when their stress is highly salient, when it's obvious, it's easier to protect the relationship from the effects.
So we can cope with it better when we know kind of what the demon is in the room. Like,
nicely said. And yes, when you're paying attention to the stress and saying, oh, we're not at our best. That's not because there's a flaw in our relationship. It's not because my partner has suddenly become less caring. It's because my partner is scared, or my partner is exhausted, or my partner is concerned. Oh yeah, of course. There's lots of reasons for all of that. So what we can do now, when the reasons are pretty obvious, is hold on to them and use them as a foundation of giving our partners a little more grace. You used the word grace earlier, grace and compassion. How do we do that? There's muscles there. How do we exercise those grace and compassion muscles? One way, by keeping in mind, oh, this is a tough time. This is a tough time.
yeah.
It turns out there are considerable rewards for doing this, for exerting the extra effort. And this is work, like this is an insight that is old. Like one of the first scholars to study this was a guy named Reuben Hill, and he was studying families after World War II. And he wrote a book, Families Under Stress. It's a classic, a timeless classic in my crowd. And what he said was, stress is a test. And generally, you don't want to take that test. You'd all like to avoid it. But if you can pass it, if you and your partner and your family members can come through stress, it can actually make couples stronger. It can make families stronger. And we all, I think, have thought of examples of couples that can look back and say, I feel close to you because I know you were there for me that time.
Yeah.
When I had that illness, when I lost my job, when we all experienced the quarantine of the global pandemic. Remember how we came together there? And that becomes a source of future strength. If you can do it, it becomes a source of future strength. And that's something that, that I tell couples, again, I'm a researcher, I'm not a practitioner, but when people ask me, what does the research say? The best thing you can do is hold tight to your people. This is the time when you need them most.
I noticed, so my husband and I have very different needs when it comes to stress. Like he has a closeness need and I have a detachment need.
Okay.
It's mostly me learning. We've learned how to do that for each other. He's gotten a lot better at it, but I will notice that my desire to be the one who lets go of what I need has intensified since we got married. Because I never actually thought I wanted to get married. I wasn't that worried about it. But like somehow like that step in the process of our relationship, like really kind of, it helped me to become a little bit better at my, putting aside maybe what I need a little more often and recognizing what he needs. And I think it's kind of the same way for him.
That last part, I think, is what makes it work. I mean, I don't know you, I don't know your relationship, but of course, in every relationship, we are going to be called upon to set aside our own needs. Every one of us. For any long-term relationship, we're going to have to set our needs aside. Like, I'm going to want something and you don't want it at that moment. There's no way that we have the same needs every minute.
Right.
What makes that okay? What makes it okay to set aside our own needs? And I think you nailed it, is that what makes it okay is I'm pretty sure that my partner is doing the same and that it's generally evening out.
Yeah.
That my putting aside this need doesn't mean my putting aside all my needs. That wouldn't feel good. And if I were the only one putting aside my needs, that wouldn't feel good. But what is the mark of a satisfying relationship is trust that I can set aside my needs for my partner. I can make sacrifices for my partner, and it will come around to me regularly before too long. So I don't have to worry. I'm not counting beans. I'm not counting every penny that I give because I know it'll even out. We're for each other. We're on each other's side generally. And that's, again, hard to hold on to in difficult times. But if you can hold on to that, and if you're lucky enough to feel that, it really pays dividends now.
We kind of have an agreement that only one of us is allowed to break down at a time. One of us can spiral out, and then that can be your turn, and then the other one gets to later.
Well, I mean, it's a joke, but it's actually, I think it's funny you should say that, because wouldn't it be nice if life could be scheduled that way?
Yeah. Nope.
And it can't be. And so these are difficult times because both partners are likely to be stressed.
Yeah.
And scared, and maybe feeling needy. Maybe feeling like it's great if we can take turns. Oh, it's Monday night, it's my night, Tuesday night, it's your night to get comforted. Problem is that a lot of nights we both need to be the one that's comforted.
True.
And I need you to step up and doing the comfort, but you need the same thing from me, and that is what makes it hard.
Very hard. So I'm concerned. We got a couple of questions about people whose plans have changed during the pandemic. There are people who were maybe planning a wedding or thought they would be married by now, and
Right.
had to pivot, or were working on homeownership or fertility. And this is putting plans on hold can be a huge stress in a marriage, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. When people have dreams of the future, especially dreams that they've nourished and thought about and elaborated, very detailed ideas about what the future holds, this pandemic has changed a lot of people's plans, a lot of people's dreams for the future. What are the implications of that? One implication is that people are feeling some grief. And it's easy to imagine that some people are feeling grief for a dream that may not come true, that they're nervous of it. Another implication of that is that this is a time when some priorities that we may not have known we had become really explicit. For example, take the many people who planned weddings during this summer who are not going to be able to have the weddings that they planned. What those couples are now being forced to do is say, what really matters to me?
Yeah.
Am I here for the relationship? Because my relationship is the same. My partner's here. Our ability to love each other hasn't changed. But our ability to participate in the institution of marriage and the institution of a wedding, well, that's changed a little bit. So some couples are just saying, well, I'm still going to get married, but I'll get married online because I don't need the wedding. Other couples are saying, no, I do want that wedding, so I'm going to postpone the wedding and just enjoy my relationship until I can have that wedding. And those are all legitimate choices, but it does sort of bring out, it articulates the difference between the relationship, which persists no matter what, and all the institutions that relationship's a part of.
How much, so I think we have time for one more question, and it's kind of a tough one, so I'm sorry to land on it, but
Stump me.
Not really stumping. It's obvious that what's happening to our communities are not happening the same across communities.
That's true.
Everything about this pandemic is hitting different communities harder than others.
Absolutely.
So how do people who are already kind of under that extra level of pressure, how is this going to affect their intimate relationships and their marriages when we're just trying to keep jobs or food on the table? Again, we've already talked about how much it can help us, bring us through, but any words of advice or wisdom or hope for people who are struggling in that way?
First, even Reuben Hill in his classic work after World War II acknowledged that the ability of a family to get through a stressful time depends a lot on how stressful is the stress, which is harder. Some people have a lot harder situations than others. And the other issue was, what kind of resources does a family have to cope with that stress? And some families have a lot more resources than others. Right now, the point you make is undeniable, that the greatest amount of stress is hitting some communities with the fewest amount of resources. That's going to be very, very hard for lots of families through no fault of their own. A lot of families are going to struggle. A lot of couples are going to struggle. And it's not their fault, but it is likely to happen. What can we do about it? Families themselves can focus on identifying clearly the resources that they have. Sometimes those resources aren't financial. Financial are great resources, but sometimes those resources are the people in their lives, the family members they can count on, the people who love them, the people they know, their religious community. People do have resources, and now is the time to rely on them and identify them. The other thing people can do is, again, be aware, wow, this is going to be harder for us because our stressor, it is harder for us. If I'm a healthcare worker, if I'm an essential worker, if I have to be exposed to a higher level risk of contracting this virus, this is going to be harder on us. And being aware of that is another thing that people will have to do. The third thing, we as a community can do things. Like those of us with privilege, I count myself in that fortunate group, can take action, can support policies, can contact our political leaders and say, hey, we are in favor of efforts to help those less fortunate than ourselves. I think, again, this is the time when those kind of actions are appropriate.
I totally agree. And also very appropriate to the mission of UCLA at large.
Agreed.
I'm very grateful that you were able to join us for this today. We're spending a lot of time this month talking about emotional and mental well-being. It's Mental Health Awareness Month. So thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Really, really a pleasure. The time flew by.
And it very much did. But thank you also to the audience for joining us. We wanted to share another slide with you. We recently launched at UCLA the Stand Together project. It's a part of our Depression Grand Challenge. And it is an online resource with tips and videos and little articles that will help us get some advice on how to cope through these times. And it's going to be updated weekly. It was launched in partnership with Beyonce's foundation. We're very grateful to her for her support and her foundation support on that. And there are also links in there for some of the resources that we kind of talked about, but particularly if you're needing some individualized mental health support. So thank you so much again, Ben, and thank you to everyone for listening. And if you want to rewatch this or share it with other people, again, our website is ucla.edu/connections. Thanks a lot.